We start this hour with what? Well, the possibility of new legal issues for Donald Trump. Just one day after posting $1 million bond that does allow Trump to appeal the defamation judgment he owes E. Jean Carroll, Trump might have actually defamed Carroll again and opened himself up to a third lawsuit. Just listen to what he said last night in Rome, Georgia.
I just posted a $91 million bond, $91 million, on a fake story, totally made up story. Think of it, $91 million. I could say things about what it would cost normally. $91 million. Based on false accusations made about me by a woman that I knew nothing about, didn't know, never heard of. I know nothing about her. She wrote a book, she said things. And when I denied it, I said, it's so crazy, it's false. I got sued for defamation.
It is just remarkable. Lisa Rubin's here, MSNBC legal correspondent. Here in D.C., January 6th committee investigator Marcus Childress.
It is remarkable because Donald Trump is Donald Trump. I want to start with this $91 million, which I think is pretty interesting. Andrew Weissman, our friend, noted in a tweet, 90 million down, 400 million to go, and the public has no idea who may have actually put up the money or provided a guarantee to support the bond. But one thing's sure, Trump is beholden to someone for a whole lot of money. Talk to us about this bond and what that says, Marcus, about the fact that it was posted. Right. Does it matter who put it up behind it? Do we need to know who that person is? We're not going to get into that transaction, obviously, between Trump and that individual. But, given his stature and who he is, it would be helpful to shed a little light on some of that.
Right. I mean, the thing I take away from it is I need better friends because clearly
really?
I know my friends wouldn't help me with that. But what it says, I think what it matters here is because he's running for president, right? And so we probably as the American public should know who is either guaranteeing or co-signing that much money for someone who's running to be the leader of the free world. What it says practically is that, look, he's going to appeal the decision in this case, but we got to look down the road. There's another 400 million or so, as Andrew Weissman said, that he's going to have to put up here, and that's a lot of money as you're heading into an election for the presidency.
I'm still like this,
Yes,
Alicia.
I know, me too, and you would think at this point, Lisa Rubin, we would no longer be surprised by his lack of discipline. But the thing we kept coming back to when this sum was ordered was, is this number big enough to make him stop? We now have an answer.
Well, you're right. We do have an answer. It was enough to make him stop until he was past a point that the judge could no longer order more, have any further consequences for it. I mean, I'm struck by the fact, Alicia, that he said these things the night after he posted a bond, filed his notice of appeal. The judgment is long past finalized. Should E. Jean Carroll and her team want any further relief now, their only option is to file a new lawsuit. And what's striking about that is in the last case, the punitive damages award of $65 million was as great as it was because Donald Trump kept saying it after the initial judgment. The argument they made is he was not deterred by the first award, and in fact, continued to say it again and again and again. And they even aired clips, for example, of the CNN town hall days after the initial verdict. So he was, in some respects, very disciplined. He didn't say a word until after the notice of appeal. He obtained a bond through a reputable insurer, Chubb Insurance Company, posted that $91.63 million. And then the night after, he goes on a tirade saying things that not only are potentially defamatory, but totally echo the two statements in 2019 for which he was held liable.
Right. So what is E. Jean Carroll's recourse now?
You know, I wish I could get into Robbie Kaplan and Sean Crowley's head right now, because I think her recourse here is to sue again, or at the very least, to oppose the bond, which is an option that Judge Kaplan gave them. Judge Kaplan said if they want to oppose the bond in any respect, they have until Monday, that's tomorrow, at 11 o'clock. If they do oppose it, there'll be a hearing at 3 p.m. tomorrow in Manhattan Federal Court. And if there is, I'll be there.
Yet another thing to look for, friends.
It was just so much. Donald Trump, he talked about literally all of his court cases last night. He went on a tirade, honestly. And for me, it's just kind of like, you in the defamation case, it's like, you don't have the money. What is happening here? And he just went on and on and on. He did call, he used, I think, a racial slur, frankly, a racist slur, to refer to the New York Attorney General, Tish James. Called her Peekaboo James. Y'all do with that what you will this Sunday morning. He also had something to say about Fani Willis. Again, every single case he talked about it. Let's play what Donald Trump said about Fani Willis in Georgia last night.
Fani Willis hired her lover, Nathan Wade, so they could fraudulently make money together. Let's make money, darling. Let's see, who can we go after? Well, if we go after somebody that nobody ever heard of, we can't make much. I got an idea. Let's do what Joe Biden and everybody else want. Let's go after Trump. And we did nothing wrong.
Much like in how he talked about E. Jean Carroll, not with lies, frankly, not with facts. Same thing here with Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. Anybody else facing this kind of legal onslaught would not be allowed to stand up and tear down the district attorneys, the attorney general, the folks that are bringing these suits against him. Why is Donald Trump consistently allowed to behave in this way? Why?
The laws don't apply to him. I mean, I think that's always been the case.
That is a crazy statement.
And it's crazy because that's the way he thinks. I mean,
wow.
The laws do apply, and that's where the test of our legal system is going to be, but he does not think that. One of the things that always stood out to us was after the big lie, after he knows he's being investigated for Jan 6, he would go on TV on the campaign trail like we saw last night and talk about how the election was still rigged and still taken from him. Like as Lisa said, he had discipline during the trial with E. Jean Carroll, but now he's losing that discipline, and it's purposeful because he wants to attack our system that is trying to hold him accountable where he does not think the laws apply to him.
Lisa, I have a two-parter for you because I want to go back to the point you made about the bond and the fact that they could oppose the bond, and if they did, there would be a hearing for that. Walk us through a little bit of what would happen if that process occurred and the judge goes, okay, no bond, number one. And number two, there's also the ongoing concern about juror access. The New York judge on the hush money case restricts access to the jurors' identities still. Talk to us a little bit of why that's still a very important part of this ongoing case, and practically, I'd say, for all these cases that involve Donald Trump, particularly after what we saw last night in Georgia.
Michael, there's a whole lot there, so let me try and take it in two parts. With respect to the bond, if E. Jean Carroll's lawyers oppose the form or amount or even the identity of the surety, meaning federal insurance company, the Chubb subsidiary that provided the bond here, they can put in papers tomorrow. After that, I don't know what it looks like because I've never seen a situation like this where the judge gives the party who's been wronged, the party who prevailed at trial, an opportunity to oppose a bond. Bonds that are issued in service of an appeal usually are pretty pro forma sorts of proceedings. So let's see what happens tomorrow. It may be that they say this is not enough security for them, or we don't know enough about the terms. Donald Trump, in that clip you played earlier, made this weird offhanded remark about how there was something off about the terms of the bond, meaning that you usually get a bond like that for less. It was a little bit vaguer than that, but I think that's what he was alluding to. Obviously, he kind of slipped up and made some reference to the negotiations between him and Chubb. Obviously, we, the public, want to know more about that. Maybe we will tomorrow. With respect to juror identities, Donald Trump has a statutory right in New York State to know the names of jurors. That distinguishes the upcoming case from the two E. Jean Carroll cases, where the jurors' identities were completely anonymized as to everyone, the parties, their lawyers, and the press. Here, Donald Trump himself will have access to their names as will his consultants and lawyers. And that includes jury consultants who will be able to do real-time research on the potential jurors. So that is a major difference. Still, we, the press, will not know their names, and Donald Trump himself will not have their residential or business addresses. That's because we've seen time and again that when he makes a call to his followers, there is frequently a response that endangers participants in the justice process, Michael, as you well know.
Well, and Marcus, as you well know.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And that's something that I'm actually worried about. Is I know that the press won't have access to these jurors' names, but I think a name is enough. And we've seen the former president, attack even law clerks who were just doing their job, talking to judges during the New York AG case. And so even having those jury consultants look up background on jurors and then having that information with the former president is something that you have to feel a lot of fear for these jurors because they didn't raise their hand to be a part of this process.